I remember the night like it was yesterday. The air in Alaska had a sharp bite to it, even more intense than usual. The long, dark winter had settled over the land, and the sun hadn't shown its face for weeks. I had never been so isolated, so utterly alone. And that's when things started to unravel. It was late, around 2 a.m. I had been working a shift at the only gas station for miles, a small place called Blackwood Fuel. It's a pit stop for the few locals that live out there in the wild. There were no tourists, not at that time of year. I wasn't expecting anyone. That's why when I heard the engine, faint but growing louder, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But no, it was a truck. A huge, black pickup that roared to life, its headlights cutting through the blinding snowstorm outside. I didn't think much of it, but as the truck pulled up to the station, something felt off. The tires screeched as they skidded on the icy gravel, and a chill ran down my spine. Not from the cold, but from something else. A man stepped out. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a rugged face hidden under a thick beard. His clothes were mismatched, like he had been wandering for days. His eyes were pale, almost translucent, and they didn't blink when they met mine. "Do you have any maps?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice that sent a shiver through me. "Maps?" I stammered. Yeah, I have a few for the local area." He didn't look like he needed a map for anything around here, but I still handed one over. He barely glanced at it before crumpling it in his hands, like it was nothing but trash. Then he asked the strangest question. "Do you know what's really out there?" I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. What did he mean by out there? There was nothing out here but miles of freezing wilderness and the occasional bear or wolf. No one came out this far unless they were desperate or just plain lost. He leaned closer, his voice lowering to a whisper, almost like he didn't want anyone to overhear. "I saw something in the woods tonight. Something that shouldn't be. You don't want to know what it is." Before I could ask him what the hell he was talking about, he spun around and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The storm outside had started to pick up, and the wind howled against the walls of the small station. The man never looked back, and he was gone as quickly as he'd come, leaving only the smell of diesel in the air. I went back inside, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. But I couldn't. There was something about the way he spoke, the fear in his eyes, that I couldn't get out of my mind. The night dragged on, but the unease stayed with me like a heavy weight on my chest. I couldn't focus on anything. The flickering neon sign outside, the constant howling wind, or even the routine of cleaning and stocking shelves. My mind kept returning to that strange man, his words echoing in my head. I tried to convince myself that he was just another oddball passing through, maybe even a little drunk from the isolation. But something about the way he looked at me, the emptiness in his eyes, was unnerving. That night, sleep came slowly, interrupted by strange noises that I couldn't place. The creaking of the gas station, the shifting of the wind, and faint footsteps in the snow. But it wasn't until I had to step outside for a cigarette around 3:30 a.m. that I truly understood what he meant. As I stood in the small parking lot, the smoke swirling in the freezing air, I saw something I couldn't explain. The snowstorm had let up slightly, and in the clearing moonlight, I could make out shapes in the distance, shadows moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but when I squinted, I saw them more clearly. Figures, tall, thin, and moving too deliberately to be animals. I froze, cigarette halfway to my lips, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. One of them turned, and I saw it. A face, not human, eyes wide and bulging, mouth hanging open as though it had forgotten how to close. The figure didn't have the smooth, coordinated movement of a person, but something jerky, unnatural. Its limbs stretched too long, and it seemed to move in a disjointed, almost painful manner. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly ducked behind the gas station's walls, heart racing. What in the hell was that? I hadn't seen anything like it before, and the stories I'd heard growing up about Alaska, about the things that lurk out there, far from civilization, suddenly seemed all too real. I quickly stomped out the cigarette and rushed back inside, locking the door behind me. But the fear didn't go away. I felt watched, like something or someone was waiting for me to make a mistake. Hours passed in silence. By 5 a.m., the storm was back in full force, battering the small station again. But that night, the unease didn't fade. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew one thing. It was real, and it wasn't friendly. Just as I was about to head into the back office to grab a coffee, I heard a tap on the glass door. I glanced up. There was no one there, only the dark, swirling snow outside. But the tap came again, this time louder. I felt my pulse spike. My throat went dry as I slowly made my way to the door, careful not to make a sound. I peered out through the small gap in the blinds. There, standing just beyond the door, was the man, the same one from earlier. His face was gaunt, and his eyes, those pale eyes, seemed empty. But this time he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at something in the distance, his body rigid. Suddenly, he turned to me, his lips parted, a strange, garbled noise escaping his throat. It was like he was trying to speak, but nothing came out. I could see the terror in his expression. "Get inside," I heard him finally rasp, "before it's too late." Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. I stood there frozen, the hairs on my neck rising, a heavy sense of dread creeping over me. Something was hunting us, and I didn't know how to escape. The next few hours felt like I was caught in a nightmare. Every sound outside, every scrape, every gust of wind, felt like it was leading up to something worse. I stayed behind the counter, my eyes flicking to the front door every few seconds. The man's warning echoed in my mind. "Get inside, before it's too late." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that wasn't human. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to call the authorities. What would I say? That some shadowy figures were lurking in the snowstorm? That a half-crazed man had warned me about something in the woods? No one would believe me. Not here. Not in the middle of nowhere. The radio was silent, static buzzing in the background. I fiddled with the knobs, trying to get some connection, some sign of life outside of this place. The wind outside picked up again, now sounding more like whispers, like voices carried by the storm. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. A darkness settled over the station that felt unnatural. I grabbed a flashlight and tried to find the emergency backup switch, my hands shaking. I turned it on, but the light seemed weak against the vast blackness of the storm outside. It did nothing to calm the unease that had taken root in my chest. That's when I heard it. A scraping noise, slow and deliberate, coming from the back door. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The door was heavy and reinforced, meant to keep out the harsh winds. But whatever was out there, I wasn't so sure it could be kept out. The noise grew louder. Something was dragging itself against the door. I couldn't even begin to describe what it sounded like nails on metal or fingers scraping against wood. But it was too rhythmic, too precise to be random. I didn't dare move. I just stood there, paralyzed, as the sound continued. Then, a soft tapping. Not on the back door, but on the front. I couldn't see anything through the small window in the door, but I felt it. That presence. There was someone or something, right outside, staring at me, waiting. I tried to steady my breath, but my heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. I couldn't stay here. I knew it. I had to leave. But as I moved toward the back door, the tapping on the front door stopped. Everything went deathly quiet. Too quiet. I pulled the back door open, just a crack, to peek outside. But before I could even make sense of what I was seeing, something lunged at me from the darkness. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, but the thing didn't follow. It only stayed in the shadows, its eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. A growl, deep and guttural, shuddered through the air. Not an animal. No, this wasn't a bear or wolf. This was something far worse. I could feel the malevolence, the hunger in that sound. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath ragged in my chest. I grabbed my phone to dial 911, but the signal was dead. It wasn't just the phone. Everything was dead. No radio, no communication. I was utterly alone. The growl echoed once more, closer now, just outside the station. It was circling me, and that's when it clicked. I wasn't the prey. I was the trap. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would give me away. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I knew it was too late for that. There was nowhere to go. This was Alaska. Miles of frozen wilderness in every direction, and the storm had trapped me here. I stumbled toward the counter, trying to find something, anything, that could help me. But my mind was racing. What was that thing? Was it the same creature the man had warned me about? The one he had claimed shouldn't exist? I glanced back at the windows, but the storm outside was so thick I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet. I had been living in Alaska for years, but this wasn't like any wilderness I knew. There was something wrong about this place. Something ancient and hungry that was stalking me. The growling stopped. For a few moments, there was only the sound of the wind outside, battering the gas station like a relentless beast. I stood motionless, waiting for the next move. I felt the air grow heavy with something cold, something unnatural. And then I heard it. A scraping noise just like before, this time coming from the inside. I whipped around, my flashlight scanning every corner. My breath caught in my throat. The walls of the gas station were moving. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A slight bulge, like something was pushing from the inside, just below the surface. Then, as I stepped closer to inspect it, the scraping sound came again, louder this time, coming from within the walls themselves. A sharp, frigid breath left my lips as realization hit me. It was in the walls. I felt sick. How long had it been in here? Had it been waiting for me to make a mistake? The man's warning flooded back to me. You don't want to know what it is. What was it? What had he seen? I tried to gather myself, but the air felt thick with dread. Then, without warning, the wall in front of me bulged outward, and something large scraped against it from the inside. A dark shape, massive and elongated, pressed against the thin wood and sheetrock. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as the thing on the other side shifted, groaning like it was alive. I took a step back, my feet slipping on the icy floor, my breath coming in short gasps. It was alive, and it was hunting me. I bolted to the back of the station, grabbing the heavy metal door that led to the storage room. I knew it wouldn't hold for long, but I needed time. Time to think, to figure out what the hell was happening. I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back against it, listening. Nothing. Silence. But it was too quiet. It was waiting. Then the flashlight flickered again, this time casting light on a small window at the back of the room. I stared at it for a long time, feeling my blood run cold as I saw movement. Shadows moving just outside, faint but unmistakable. And then I heard it, whispers. Low, guttural whispers, like a voice you hear in your nightmares. The whispering grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the window. I froze, unable to move, my pulse racing in my ears. The voice, if it could even be called a voice, mumbled words I couldn't understand. Then, through the crack in the blinds, I saw it. A figure, a silhouette standing outside, covered in shadows, with pale, glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. It was the man, the same man who had warned me, but now he was no longer just a person. His limbs were stretched, grotesque, like he was no longer bound by human form. His body shifted and jerked unnaturally, his head tilting at impossible angles. It wasn't him anymore. Whatever had been hunting me had taken him, and now it was using his body as a vessel. I backed away from the window, stumbling as panic set in. My thoughts were spinning. How had it done that? What was it? The creature in the woods? Had it been stalking the gas station this whole time? The whispers at the window grew louder, frantic. The thing was getting closer, its breath fogging up the glass. I had to act. The air felt heavier with every passing second, thick with the presence of something so wrong that it made my skin crawl. My head was spinning as the whispers outside grew more urgent, more frantic. The man, no, whatever it was, wasn't just at the window anymore. I could hear it moving around the building, scratching at the walls, tapping on the metal door behind me. The sounds were disjointed, like it was everywhere at once. I had no idea what to do. I could feel my sanity slipping, my mind teetering on the edge of panic. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just hide forever. I had to survive. The man's warning still rang in my ears. You don't want to know what it is. But the time for questions had passed. I had to face whatever it was before it made me its next victim. I looked around the storage room, searching for something that could be used as a weapon. There was a crowbar near the far wall, a few old cans of fuel, and a dusty toolbox. Nothing that could help me against a creature that could bend the laws of nature itself. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something else. The old emergency flare gun mounted on the wall. My heart leapt at the thought. It wasn't much, but it was something. I grabbed it, loading a flare into the chamber, my hands trembling. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I had to try. The only way I'd get out of here was to create some kind of distraction, to force whatever it was to show itself. I moved quietly to the back door, keeping low, my eyes scanning the shadows. Every part of me screamed to turn and run, but there was no time for that. There was no running from this thing. I reached the door, holding the flare gun tightly in my hand. I slowly twisted the handle and cracked the door open, just enough to peek outside. The snowstorm had thickened again, but I could still see the shadows moving, those long, jerking shapes, each one more unnatural than the last. The figure of the man, or whatever had taken him, stood just beyond the corner of the building, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The wind whipped around me, and the snow pelted my face, but I kept moving forward, keeping the flare gun pointed ahead. Every step felt like it could be my last. And then it happened. I heard it. A deep growl, not from the man, but from somewhere much deeper in the woods. The creature was close. So close, I could feel it breathing, feel its hunger radiating in the air. I spun around, but I saw nothing at first. But then the shadows parted. A figure stepped forward, the man's body, twisted, grotesque, emerging from the darkness. His eyes, once pale and lifeless, now glowed with an unnatural, fiery intensity. His limbs were no longer human. They were long and inhumanly thin, bent at impossible angles. He was smiling, or at least it looked like it. His mouth stretched too wide, and his teeth gleamed in the dim light of the flare. Before I could react, it lunged. I fired the flare instinctively, and it shot through the air, lighting up the night like a fiery comet. The bright light burned into the thing's face, and for a split second, I thought I saw it flinch. But then the flare fizzled out. The creature didn't stop. It didn't stop. In one quick motion, it darted toward me, its skeletal hands reaching out to grab me. I barely had time to react. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The air was thick with cold, and I could feel the weight of the thing's presence bearing down on me. Suddenly, I remembered the toolbox in the back room. There were tools in there, sharp ones. It was the only chance I had. I shoved the flare gun into my jacket pocket and ran back toward the station, stumbling through the snow, the wind biting at my face. Behind me, I could hear it, a series of sharp, uneven steps, dragging and scraping in the snow. It was following me. I reached the back door, slamming it open, and ran straight for the toolbox. My hands shook as I grabbed the nearest tool, a long, rusted knife. I didn't wait to think. The door behind me splintered, and the creature was there, its twisted face peering through the wreckage. I lunged, swinging the knife at its face. It hissed, but it didn't back off. It didn't flinch, but something shifted then. The creature hesitated. It seemed confused, like it wasn't sure how to respond to me, to this sudden defiance. The creature, or whatever it was, paused just for a moment. And in that moment, I saw my chance. With every ounce of strength left in me, I pushed forward, slashing at its eyes. It screamed, a horrible, unnatural sound that made my ears ring. And then it backed off. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands trembling, watching it retreat into the storm. It didn't vanish completely, but it didn't come closer either. I didn't know if I had killed it or if it was just waiting. All I knew was that it was gone, for now. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, my chest heaving with each shaky breath. The creature, whatever it was, had retreated into the storm, its unnatural form swallowed by the swirling snow and darkness. But the silence that followed was just as terrifying as the encounter itself. I could still hear the echoes of its growl in my mind, the way its breath had filled the air with a suffocating coldness, the way its eyes had gleamed with hunger. Was it truly gone? Or was it just waiting for me to make a mistake? The knife in my hand trembled, slick with sweat. I knew I couldn't stay here. The gas station had become a prison, and no matter how many doors I locked, the thing outside had proven that it could break through anything. I moved quickly to the front of the station, keeping the dim light of the flare gun in my pocket. I had to find a way out. The storm still raged, but I had no choice. I couldn't stay in this place another second. I had to get to the truck, the one I'd seen parked out front earlier. Maybe I could drive through the storm, head back to town. But what if it was waiting for me along the road? I slowly cracked open the front door, peering into the darkness outside. The truck was still there, sitting ominously under the dim glow of the gas station's lights. The wind whipped at my face as I stepped outside, my boots crunching through the snow. My fingers ached as I gripped the handle of the flare gun, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows, watching me. But the storm was relentless, and the visibility was poor. I reached the truck. The engine had been off for hours now, and it was freezing. My fingers fumbled for the keys in my pocket, but as I reached for them, I heard a sound, a soft scrape, like the claws of something dragging along the snow. I froze. My heart raced. The scrape was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make every nerve in my body scream for me to run. I glanced over my shoulder, my eyes darting in the dark. There was nothing there. Nothing except for the faint glow of the creature's eyes, reflecting in the rearview mirror of the truck. It was here. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut and locking it, my hands shaking violently as I turned the ignition. The engine sputtered at first, then roared to life. I slammed the gear shift into drive, my foot pressing down hard on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, spinning in the snow before I managed to get some traction. As I sped through the snowstorm, the world outside became a blur of white and black, and I kept my eyes on the road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror again. I could feel its presence behind me, closer now, its energy like a weight pressing against my back. But I didn't dare stop, not for a second. I drove for hours, my mind spinning. Had I truly escaped it? Or was it still following me, lurking in the storm, waiting for the right moment to strike? As dawn finally broke, the storm began to subside. The sun, pale and cold, cast a dim light over the snow-covered ground. I had made it through the night, but the question still haunted me. What was that thing? And how had it been able to follow me? Had it been tracking me all along, waiting for me to make a mistake? I didn't have the answers, and maybe, just maybe, that was the worst part of all. Epilogue. I never went back to that gas station. I moved away, left Alaska behind, and tried to forget everything I saw that night. But I know now, deep in my bones, that some things should not be disturbed. Some things should not be looked at. And sometimes, the wilderness of Alaska hides more than just wolves and bears. Sometimes, it hides things that were never meant to be found. I'll never know if I was truly the one who got away, or if that thing is still out there, waiting for the next lonely soul to cross its path. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget the night I saw the thing in the woods. And I know it's still out there. I thought I had escaped. I thought I was safe. But as the weeks passed, I realized something. It never really left me. At first, I convinced myself it was the trauma, the isolation, the fear that had twisted my mind during that storm. I told myself that I had imagined the whole thing, that the darkness of the wilderness had preyed on my senses, and the man, his warnings, his strange behavior, was just a product of the environment. But the truth? The truth is much worse than that. I was living in a small town now, far away from Alaska. I had a new job, a new life, but I could never shake the feeling of being watched. It started with small things. A cold chill in the air that would come out of nowhere. Objects in my home being shifted ever so slightly when I wasn't looking. But it wasn't just the strange occurrences. It was the dreams. Every night, I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. In my dreams, I was back at the gas station, trapped in the snowstorm. The creature's glowing eyes were always just behind me, watching, waiting. I could feel it in the darkness, hear its breath, its whispers, growing closer and closer. But I would always wake up before it could reach me. And then the final piece fell into place. Started with a phone call. One night, just as I was about to go to bed, my phone rang. I answered it without thinking, expecting it to be a telemarketer or an old friend. But when I picked up, I heard nothing but heavy breathing on the other end of the line. I called out, "Hello? Who is this?" A voice, ragged and broken, came through the line. "You're not safe. You can't run from it. It's still watching you." My blood turned to ice. The voice sounded so familiar, so hollow, like it was coming from deep inside my head. It was the man from the gas station. He was gone, I thought. I had escaped, but it wasn't over. I could hear the same terrible truth in his voice. The creature was not confined to the wilderness of Alaska. It had followed me, and it wasn't just a creature. It was something ancient, something that had been out there for longer than we could comprehend, something that fed on isolation, on fear. I understood now that it was always looking for new victims, new souls to twist and claim as its own. I disconnected the call, but the message was clear. I could run from Alaska, but I could never outrun it. I had been marked. I moved again, changing my name, my life, everything, but deep down I knew. The creature, the whispers, the cold, relentless feeling of being watched. It was never going to stop. It would follow me until the day I made my final mistake. And someday it would find me again.